Defenders, system operators, and fellow security practitioners, welcome. This is a Code Ninja Security Advisory. We're initiating a critical, real-time intelligence drop right now regarding a highly active, severe threat to your XMPP perimeters. Look, I need your absolute focus on this one. If you're operating communications infrastructure, specifically anything relying on open-source routing, you are currently in the crosshairs of a major vulnerability. We're practicing coordinated vulnerability disclosure today to force vendor patches and protect our networks. So let's get straight into the intel.
Okay, let's dive into the severity here. When this vulnerability was first submitted to the National Vulnerability Database by MITRE, it was sitting at a medium severity base score of 5.3. But during their initial analysis, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, took one look and immediately escalated this to a high severity base score of 7.5. That is a massive jump, guys. It signals an urgent, completely non-negotiable need for immediate perimeter mitigation. Now, while this exploit doesn't actually impact data confidentiality or integrity, NIST recognized its devastatingly high impact on system availability.
So what's the actual target? We are looking at Prosody, specifically Prosody XMPP servers, and the identifier to track is CVE-770. What we're dealing with here is a nasty, devastating memory exhaustion denial of service attack. For those of you operating Prosody to handle your real-time messaging and chat protocols, your servers are incredibly vulnerable to being completely knocked offline by malicious actors who are just aiming to eat up all your available system memory.
Now, this disclosure timeline has moved literally at breakneck speed, which means the threat landscape is evolving rapidly. On May 1st, MITRE officially submitted the data, and NIST completed their initial analysis, which triggered that severity escalation to 7.5 we just talked about. The very next day, May 2nd, Tenable released Nessus plugin ID 311724 to help operators swiftly detect vulnerable packages across Linux distros. And then just days later, on May 8th, Tenable pushed a critical update to their detection tooling to ensure accurate monitoring. It's moving fast.
All right, before we get into the actual technical teardown, I'm pausing this briefing for a mandatory comms check. Consider this a vital, tactical requirement for our cyber defense unit. Step 1. Hit subscribe for its CWE-770 and enable your notifications right now. This is a strict security necessity for receiving real-time, actionable intelligence drops exactly like this one. Step 2. Smash that like button. I need you to do this to formally acknowledge receipt of this critical transmission so I know our defense grid is online and receiving loud and clear.
Finally, I need a quick census. Drop into the comments right now and give me your status report. Are you patched or are you vulnerable? We need to actively gauge the blast radius of this vulnerability across our community. Your telemetry helps us understand exactly how exposed our collective infrastructure actually is at this very moment.
Protocol Alpha, understanding the blast radius. Let's transition right into the technical anatomy of this exploit.
At its core, CVE-2026-4357 is rooted in a specific weakness known as CWE-770. That's defined as the allocation of resources without limits or throttling. In plain terms, what's happening is the Prosody software allocates a reasonable resource, in this case system memory, on behalf of an actor without imposing any intended restrictions on the size or the number of resources that can actually be requested. It's basically like handing a blank, pre-signed check to a stranger. It completely violates the intended security policy by blindly trusting the incoming request size.
And this brilliantly illustrates exactly how the attack manifests. In a normal, everyday XMPP connection, your server processes standard, lightweight XML streams to facilitate chat and routing. Nice and easy. But an attacker doesn't play by those rules. They utilize an XML parsing resource amplification technique. By sending specifically crafted, highly amplified XML payloads, they literally force the Prodigy server's parser into absolute overdrive. The system desperately tries to allocate memory for this massive, unrestricted request, which rapidly leads to complete memory exhaustion and a total crash of your service.
So the absolutely crucial point here is the sheer ease with which this can be executed. Just looking at the CVSS vector string, the attack vector is network-based, the attack complexity is low, and the most critical danger of all, privileges required are none and user interaction is none. Adversaries need absolutely zero authentication, zero credentials, and zero help from your users to execute this strike. They can just remotely launch this low-complexity attack right over the network and completely cripple your communications infrastructure.
Now, take a look at the current exploit prediction scoring system, or EPS score. Right now, data provided by FIRST estimates the probability of this vulnerability being exploited in the wild within the next 30 days at 0.071%. That puts it in the 22nd percentile. Listen to me, do not let that low number give you a false sense of security. What this actually means is that we have a very narrow, incredibly critical window of opportunity to deploy our fixes right now before threat actors operationalize this and mass exploitation inevitably begins.
Protocol Beta, the patch, and remediation. Time to shift from threat theory to actionable intelligence. Let's lock down that perimeter.
Your first audit directive as system operators is to immediately deploy Nessus plugin ID 311724. You've got to run local checks to hunt for vulnerable, unpatched packages hiding on your Linux and Unix hosts. Tenable's analytics specifically flagged that multiple distributions, and that includes Ubuntu LTS versions all the way from 16.04 up to 24.04, plus Debian systems, were impacted by vulnerabilities where vendor-supplied patches just weren't immediately available. So you cannot rely on automatic updates for this. You absolutely must audit your specific environment.
Thankfully, we do have the precise target metrics to cross-reference against your audit results. The vulnerable Prosody core versions are anything prior to 0.12.6, as well as versions 1.0.0 through 13.0.0, specifically before version 13.0.5. Now, if you're operating on Debian, the security tracker confirms that fixed packages have been successfully propagated out. You need to pull version 0.123-1 plus deb12u1 for Bookworm, 13.0.1-1 plus deb13.1u for Trixie, or 13.0.5-1 for SID. Get these deployed ASAP to permanently close this resource exhaustion loophole.
Before we wrap this briefing, let's just talk about the code we operate by. Why do we broadcast this intelligence? Because users need to know to protect their systems. That is the ethical foundation of coordinated vulnerability disclosure. We don't hide vulnerabilities, we expose them to the light. Our code demands transparency to secure critical infrastructure. By sharing this detailed breakdown, we force the hand of vendors to release patches faster, and we empower you, the defenders on the front lines, to protect your perimeters.
So, do not wait for active exploitation to suddenly hit your logs. Run your audits today, deploy those fixed packages, and lock down your XMPP servers against these unauthenticated amplification attacks. But I want you to ask yourself this before we go. If a critical infrastructure component like Prosody can be felled by a simple amplified XML request, what other unseen resource limitations are lurking right now in your trusted open-source stack? Think about it. This concludes the Code Ninja Security Advisory on CVE 2026-4357. Remain vigilant, execute your mitigation strategies, and as always, stay secure.